Okay, good morning, everyone. We are live from the Czech Republic, from Velké Pavlovice. And this is the beginning of our international conference, Wildlife Conservation in Human Landscape, organized by Alka Wildlife and the support of the Czech Technology Agency and the support also of the Ecocentrum Termanka in Velké Pavlovice. My name is Fernando Mateos. I'm a biologist working for Alka Wildlife.
And my name is Alberto Parada. I'm a freelancer biologist based on Spain.
And we will be your online hosts, and please bear with us because this is going to be very challenging with a pretty bizarre mix of online talks and people connecting from other countries. So we will try our best and we hope you can enjoy. We are going to.
We can start with the first lecture. Who's the first speaker?
So our first presenter is connecting from Kenya, and he's Iñaki Abella Gutiérrez. He will start the plenary talk today with a talk what works in conservation and what doesn't, which should be a very interesting review of his more than 20 years experience in conservation projects all over the world.
Okay.
Hello, I am Iñaki Abella Gutiérrez. I have a master's degree in nature conservation. I am the director of the Spanish Association Biomas. I would like to talk about what works in conservation from my very point of view. Short version, working with local communities. The long version, the following presentation. So the following presentation and everything I am going to say in it are my personal opinions based on my experience in non-current times and in places that have changed a lot since then. So much of what I say might be completely out of date or out of place, or both. On the other hand, I have come to some of these conclusions by looking back on my own work, not necessarily when I was doing it.
So, what works in conservation and what doesn't? Notes from my personal experience
in conservation in different projects around the world. In the mid-90s, while I was studying in the university, I started to work in different environmental volunteer projects in Spain. And in the year 2000, I took the leap, and as part of my career, I worked 4 months in a conservation in the Bolivian Pantanal. After this, and after spending almost 2 years continuing my studies, the next big project and all those that have come after are based on a little white lie. A friend of mine applied for a job where they require a couple. For her, that meant they wanted 2 people, but for me, that meant they wanted 2 people who were actually a couple. So when they called from London to interview us, she was assisting in the cleanup of the Prestige oil spill in North Spain, so it was me who answered the phone. When the key question came, I didn't hesitate. We have been together for almost 2 years, I said. We were taken on for the project and we spent the next 3 years here in Costa Rica. Yes, I know, it is like a paradise, so, well, that friend of mine is now my wife and the mother of my children. We worked for 3 years on a sea turtle conservation project in Costa Rica. We also had the opportunity to visit numerous sea turtle projects in both the Caribbean and the Pacific sides of the Costa Rica. During those years, I also collaborated with numerous projects in Panama, Nicaragua, and Guatemala. I then spent some time in the Galapagos Islands when I worked on a conservation education project for local youth and where I was able to assist with several conservation projects. One on invasive plants, a serious problem there, and another one on sea turtle research and conservation. From there, I moved to Baja California Sur in Mexico, where, while working for a local youth education program, I collaborated with REID and cetacean research and conservation projects. From America, in a broad sense, I flew to Africa, Mozambique in particular. My first contact with the African savanna was a total immersion, as I lived inside the Gorongosa National Park for a little over a year. This park is home to one of the most ambitious ecological restoration projects on the continent. From Mozambique, I went to Kenya in 2010, where I have lived ever since, and where I created the Asociación Biomas, with which I organized training field courses for university students, mainly Spaniards, as most of our courses are in Spanish. Through this work, I have had the opportunity to visit and collaborate with numerous projects, mainly in Kenya, but also in Central African Republic and in Uganda. In these more than 20 years, many things have happened to me. I have had to eat anything. I've been bitten by all kinds of bugs. I've suffered tropical diseases. I got lost in jungles, and in mangroves, and in wetlands, in mountains, grasslands, everywhere. I broke bones. Well, actually, I broke only one, a toe, and not because of a dangerous and exciting adventure. I just adventure, but okay, I broke it. I have gone through great disappointments and great joys, but I have seen a major change in conservation projects, a change for the better. Increasingly, I have noticed that the projects have more and more involvement with the local populations, whether indigenous or not. And here is the main point of my presentation, what I think is a major factor for long-term success of a project: the involvement at all levels of the local populations, of the people that live with what we want to conserve. After this introduction, I would like to give some examples that I have seen and experienced during my career. Some of these examples I lived through more than 15 years ago, so it is very likely that things have changed and that what I am talking about here does not resemble the reality there today. In the Bolivian Pantanal, extreme case of Western arrogance. A Spanish association founded a research station in Bolivia to contribute to the conservation of the Bolivian area of the world's largest wetland. The intentions are good, and the implementation of the project was very good. But everything was spoiled by an old-fashioned individual attitude of collecting animals and subsequent export them without following local legislation and international agreements, which ends with the expulsion of the team and the project from the country, finishing the good work of more than 15 years. While this was happening, a few years earlier, in areas near the Bolivian Pantanal, tribal communities agreed to relinquish little to an area to become a national park, and officially became the first indigenous managers and owners of a national park, the Ca-y-Ya, El Gran Chaco National Park in Bolivia. From Bolivia to Costa Rica were two diametrically opposed ways of doing conservation, the cases of Tortuguero and Ostional. Well, the Caribbean beaches of Tortuguero are home to one of the largest green turtle nesting sites in the world. In 1955, an important conservation and research project was initiated by Dr. Archie Carr, a professor of zoology at the University of Florida, which is the pioneer project in the country and the one that lays the foundations for monitoring turtle nesting on the beach. For more than 50 years, almost all beach work was carried out by foreigners, volunteers and professionals, mainly from the United States. The control of Dr. Carr and his foundation, the Caribbean Conservation Corporation, nowadays the Sea Turtle Conservancy, is such that he has no qualms about flying entire nests of green turtles to Florida in an attempt to establish a nesting population there. In 1975, the National Park of Tortuguero was created, and tourism began to arrive, which attracted a more stable population to service the hotels. By 2003, the first time I visited the park, when I was already working a few kilometers farther south, the town of Tortuguero had more than 100,000 inhabitants, which increased during the nesting season, mainly from March to September, for two reasons: the arrival of tourists and the arrival of hueveros, poachers engaged in illegal harvesting of turtle eggs and turtle meat. As the turtle project does not count and does not involve the local population, they continue to illegally collect turtle eggs whenever they can. As the collection of turtle eggs is a good business, there are many single men who collect turtle eggs and spare their earnings in the village of Tortuguero, because there are many men with money, girls under the age of 15 drop out of school to provide services to these men. All this turns the environment of Tortuguero village into a stinking den where the only options for the locals is to be a huevero or a prostitute, where drugs are available to everyone and where the local populations lives side by side with rich tourists and research assistants from rich countries, while they have neither sewage nor rubbish collection or minimum health or education services. Meanwhile, on the Pacific coast of the same country, one of the largest mass arribadas in Spanish, of sea turtles in the world is taking place in Ostional Beach. An arribada is a massive and synchronized arrival of sea turtles to lay their eggs. Since the 80s, the University of Costa Rica has supervised and monitored these arrivals, as well as the collection of a fraction of the eggs by the community, which organized itself as the Asociación Integral de Desarrollo de Ostional, for the management of the resource. This local management, although of course criticized by purists, has two positive effects: one for the turtles, as it keeps the arribadas at their maximum number of nests, and for the people, as it is a very important source of income and keeps the community involved in turtle conservation. They are the first ones interested in the turtle nestings, so they don't kill them and they do not collect more eggs than allowed. There is virtually no poaching in there. The eggs are sold throughout the country and carry a certificate of authenticity of origin. Of course, I'm not saying that eggs should be collected off the Caribbean beaches, since the ecology and demography of the species of sea turtles is very different in one place and the other, but I do believe that the involvement of the Tortuguero local population in the early stages, at the 80s at least, could have meant better living conditions for the locals and therefore better protection for the turtles. Although I don't know the current reality in the village of Tortuguero, I do know that nowadays the local population is more involved in turtle patrons and monitoring. But even so, it is an area where poaching of turtle eggs and meat still occurs in the supposedly idyllic and conservationist Costa Rica. Cabo Pulmo in Baja California Sur is an example for the world. Cabo Pulmo was a small community of pearl fishermen where large number of sharks, turtle and large fish were fished. At the beginning of the 90s, fishermen realized that they were running out of fish, which, together with the first from the Autonomous University of Baja California Sur, led to the fishermen who began to protect their fishing resources. Over the time, the fishermen on this community asked the Mexican government to create a protected area, protected by national laws, and thus in 1995 the Cabo Pulmo National Marine Park was created, being one of the few national parks in the world created by local initiation. The success of this protection has meant that the biomass of fauna and flora in the area has increased by 600%, and the state of the reef has improved significantly, and it is estimated that the Cabo Pulmo reef exports some 600 tons of commercially valuable fish per year to fisheries areas in La Paz and Loreto. Cabo Pulmo's sustainability model has been based on the conservation of marine resources integrated into economic activities that have had excellent results. However, it is still a case of fragile conservation due to the development of unsustainable tourism that constantly threatens to build larger hotels complexes that the area can support. In the image and likeness of the disasters that occurred in Los Cabos over the years 70 and 80s. Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique, the project that started all over again to involve more the local communities. In 2004, a millionaire from the USA decided to leave everything and get involved in a conservation project in Mozambique. It began the restoration of the Gorongosa National Park, which in the 60s had one of the highest animal densities of the continent. After signing an agreement with the national government, it created several departments, namely research, conservation, communities, and sustainable tourism. In these early years, the focus was on research as the central axis from which conservation measures were taken. But as time goes by, the axis went from conservation to communities, so that the development of the living conditions of local communities is the stimulus to pursue conservation by these same communities. In this sense, one of the first measures was the promotion and development of community gardens, vegetable gardens that could supply the lodges in the national park, so that the restaurants would use not only local products, but above all, products of the community, enriching themselves from the park itself, but through their own work, not through the charity and arms of the park. Gradually, the park has been supporting the development and entrepreneurship of numerous community-based natural research management projects. And currently, honey and coffee are marketed under the name of the Gorongosa National Park, with even international sales. Finally, a master's degree in conservation has been created in the park itself, under the auspices of the eminent biologist Edward O. Wilson, aimed mainly at Mozambican students, with the idea that in the medium term they will be the ones to manage their own parks and natural resources. This master is held at the research station facilities within the park itself. Although the current model could be not perfect, since many of the decisions remain top-down by the Mozambican political elite rather than the white and international research elite, the involvement of local population in the benefits generated by the activities of the park allows to predict a longer-term conservationist route in this park. Dzanga-Sangha, the controversy is served, or when you are grown with the local populations. In 2010, I spent some time in one of the most impressive natural areas in the world, where two of my passions, large mammal and a dense rainforest, come together. Dzanga-Sangha, a small wedge of the Congo jungle that enters the Central African Republic. My mission there was to participate in the lowland gorilla habituation project, with the idea of attracting tourism that could make a long-term conservation program for the area a reality. In addition, I was doing preliminary sampling of the amphibians and reptiles. There are two very important projects in the area led by WWF and WCS. From the latter organization is Michael Fay, who became famous for completing in 1999 his mega transect, a walking route from this area to the coast of Gabon without leaving the jungle. and which National Geographic, which sponsored the adventure, devoted extensive media to coverage too. Fay told the US Congress in 2003, "I believe that Teddy Roosevelt had it right. In 1907, when the United States was at the stage of its development not dissimilar to the Congo Basin today, President Roosevelt made the creation of 930,000 kilometers square of protected areas, almost the size of France and Spain together, and this was the cornerstone of his domestic policy. My work in the Congo Basin has been basically to try to bring this US model to Africa." Even though this copy of a conservation model is nothing new, it has been going on since Yellowstone was proclaimed a national park, it doesn't mean that the idea is a good one, even if the idea was good in its place of origin, something that is even doubtful. This conservation model entails something very dangerous and which has also been seen to be very detrimental to conservation, namely the expulsion of the original populations from their territories. This is all the more damaging when the original populations are groups of hunter-gatherers who have been living for hundreds of thousands of years and who, of course, have no papers to prove their ownership. In the particular case of Dzanga-Sangha, which is part of the trinational park between the Central African Republic, Cameroon and the Republic of Congo, considered a natural continuum as well as of the indigenous peoples, the original population affected were different groups of pygmies, such as the Bayaka. They were dispossessed of their ancestral territories and pushed to the boundaries of the park so as not to disturb conservation purposes, facilitated also by the fact that the local governments, dominated by ethnic Bantus, do not recognize the pygmies and their rights to the lands they have inhabited for thousands of years, something that is repeated in all areas where the pygmies live, from Gabon to Uganda. In addition, there have been many allegations of abuses by park rangers and conservation project staff, leading Survival International to sue WWF for human rights violations in Cameroon. Once a community is evicted, their vital connections with their land is severe. The older generations cannot teach their grandchildren the knowledge they need to live well on their lands, and the community's health often plummets. But another affront the Bayaka had to suffer was due to who was hired by WWF and WCS, primarily to carry out the conservation project tasks. Not only were they driven off their land, but they were barely counted on to conserve it, relying on Sango-Batu populations who have no connection to the forest and whose only practical difference from the Bayaka is that they speak, read and write French. However, the project still needs the Bayaka, as they are the only ones who read the forest and the only ones who can guide the rangers and technicians into the forest. So, while the Bayaka's role in the park's long-term conservation is irreplaceable, that of the Sango, the WWF and WCS technicians can be done by almost anyone. So the Bayaka, used by the project as trackers, fulfill a fundamental but underappreciated function. Most of these Bayaka, when they return from the forest after days or weeks of hard work, drink their pay. This shows little appreciation for their work and little concern for these people who centrally have a much different lifestyle than those of us in Prague, Madrid, or the Sango in Bajanga. It is an obvious case of negligence on the part of the conservationists who should have had the support of anthropologists and sociologists from the beginning of the project to involve the Bayaka in order to feed them into the project in a dignified and useful way for the project itself but above all for the Bayaka. Since then, thanks among other things to pressure from Survival International, the issue has been in the media and things seems to be improving for the Bayaka, and Dzanga-Sangha National Park is working much more with the Bayaka community, also offering them access to clinics and media care. Semliki Wildlife Reserve and the Semliki Chimpanzee Project in Uganda. One man and a project. There are projects so small but so important, so unknown but so emblematic, so off the radar that nobody cares. And that's where a person comes in by chance and makes that project his or her life project. We can categorize these projects as top-down without any doubt, but there could hardly ever be a bottom-up project in their place. The Semliki Chimpanzee Project in western Uganda, almost on the border of the Democratic Republic of Congo, is one of those projects, 100% dependent on one person, in this case, a professor at Indiana University, Dr. Kevin D. Hunt. Such projects depend 100% on the effort, hard work, and passion of one person or a small institution. Of course, beyond this person or institution, the project has little future and is therefore doomed in the long run. However, a project like the Semliki Chimpanzee Project is fundamental, and perhaps we should live in the present to preserve its natural values, even if it is one more year, and as they say, next year, we'll see. Without ceasing to be a personal project, we at the Asociación Biomas have been very involved with this project since 2017, when we expanded the workstation they have there with very clear benefits in terms of preventing the poaching that often plagues the area. There are thousands of these projects around the world, and together they are very important for global conservation, even if they have very short legs. So what do we do with them? The idea would be to get long-term funding to be able to establish a community project with grassroots management, but even this is very difficult and requires a very large first top-down effort in financial and human resources. Land sharing as land sparing, the great debate. Since these terms were introduced in a well-known paper by researchers from the Zoology Department of Cambridge University, the debate has been endless. However, the type of use of natural areas by local communities or indigenous groups has hardly ever been taken into consideration. This is because we have a preconceived and mortifying idea that this is well illustrated in this cartoon from Abstrus Woods, which is that everything we humans do is artificial and therefore unnatural and harmful. As the comic states, the distinction between natural and artificials always struck me as someone artificial. This has traditionally led us to approach nature conservation without including humans, and as in some of the examples given in this presentation, has led us to expel human populations that are perfectly integrated into the ecosystems in order to create national parks and other reserves. Conservation with local and indigenous populations as a starting point can lead us to conserve from an inclusive philosophy, where everyone, including humans, is part of nature, and everyone, especially humans, are responsible for its preservation for future generations. The Kenyan example, KWS as KWCA. Kenya's second largest source of income is tourism, but by far the largest is agriculture and livestock. Approximately 30% of the human population, over 50% of livestock live in the rangelands, that is white in the area of the map, which occupy just over 88% of the territory and support the vast majority of the protected natural areas and the 65 to 75% of the wildlife outside these protected areas. These are in green here. The Kenya Wildlife Service manages about 60 national parks and reserves, covering about 8% of the country's land area. It was founded in 1989 and has since taken over the management of areas already established by the British colony, as early as in 1946. The Kenya Wildlife Conservancy Association was founded at the end of 2012, but some conservancies have been around for much longer than that, dating back to the early 19th. The KWCA is made up of 12 regional associations spread across Kenya, comprising more than 160 conservancies and more than 60,000 kilometers square. The main difference between the KWS and the KWCA is that the former, as a good heir of the colonial times, understands conservation from a classical perspective, where humans, populations, and activities other than tourism are completely forbidden inside. In the map, in light green are the national parks, the dark green are the forests, and the brown areas are the conservancies. On the contrary, the KWCA is a grassroots organization that emerged from below, from the landowners, be they private, public or communal, so that both human populations and their activities are allowed, always within the framework of the protection and conservation of nature. One of the most notable functions of these conservancies is their commitment to governance, pacification and security in areas, especially in the north and northeast of Kenya, that have traditionally been very insecure due to tribal disputes and cattle rustlings from one another. We can see on the Conservancy web pages how the pillars of their objectives are repeated, where the emphasis is on human aspects like livelihoods, pacification, security, governance, policy, advocacy, far removed from the more classical and exclusive conservation. We can see here, for example, people are as much a part of nature as other forms of life. Here we have another examples in the web page. Regardless of their role in wildlife conservation, the means used by some of the organizations mentioned here, especially the Northern Rangelands Trust, have been heavily criticized, and in fact a report has recently come out that is highly critical in their ways of doing things, even accusing them of human rights crimes. Of course, NRT's version is very different, and I don't know the ins and outs of it to take sides, but one thing must be clear, and that is that the end does not justify the means. I personally believe that the sparing model is outdated in many ways, and is unsustainable in many areas where human density and pressure is high, and therefore this type of protected areas generated nothing but conflicts. This is not to say that there are traditional national parks that have a great future and that are absolutely necessary to safeguard some species and ecosystems that are more sensitive to human presence. This type of space can always function as a core, while shared spaces can function in much larger areas and act as a buffer for the former. But either way, it seems clear that it is necessary to bring positions closer together, and above all, to involve the Kenyan central government, traditionally absent from most of these areas of the country. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Well, thank you, everyone. Now we connect live with Iñaki, and then we can have a discussion with him and ask questions. And this will be retransmitted a bit later to the people that are following online.
Okay, we have Iñaki here, so let him come in.
Now it should go through the speakers.
Perfect.
So look, I'm going to show you.
Hello. Hello, how are you?
So here you have
your audience.
Nice. I hope they understood me more or less.
It was perfect, and also you had the subtitles, so it was perfect. Thank you so much for the effort, and come on, we are all impressed. It's just too impressive. You have been everywhere, doing lots of interesting projects.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I haven't been in Northern Europe.
Only a bit more. I'm sure you will have. Well, if you agree, I'm going to open the questions to.
Yes, please.
Mm-hmm.
If anyone has a question, yes, Lucas. You can say it, then we can repeat it.
Yeah, so we repeat it.
On the Costa Rica project on the Pacific Ocean side, there is this involvement of egg collection of locals. I would like to know who is calculating the amount of eggs could be taken, and if this activity is paid also somehow partly from the gain from the eggs selling, or if it's just independent that some conservation agency is saying quota and.
So Lucas Polednik, I don't know if you heard.
Yeah, I heard it, and more or less I understood it. So the things are mainly based in science done by the University of Costa Rica. There are several researchers in there, especially Cachi, also known as his real name, and that is, well, I don't remember because I always call him Cachi. Anyway, there are two researchers, very important researchers in herpetology in Costa Rica, and they have been monitoring the beach for over 30 years. So they more or less know when the arribada is going to be big or when it's going to be small. The important point in here is to understand that if they remove part of the eggs, they allow to the arribadas to be always big. Why is that? Because if arribada is very big, the turtles put in the beach so many nests that most of them will perish, will die, because of contamination, or because just the last turtles, they just dig out the nest that the previous turtles put them. So it's quite important for the community to collect the eggs so that the eggs nest, the last days, they will survive. At this point, what they are doing is, is not completely natural, because the natural cycle could be in decades to have ups and downs in the arribadas. But in this way, they are keeping the arribada in the maximum or close to the maximum. That is good for the collection of eggs, of course, but as well is good for the turtles. Obviously, we would like to be completely natural, but things are not natural. So I think here right now, because all of the marine turtles are in danger, it's better to keep them in this way. But trying to answer in your question, this research is doing by the University of Costa Rica.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And they are the ones deciding how to take the nests, or which nests actually within the whole.
Well, they mainly they take the first nets. Usually arribadas last 2, 3, 4 days, and they remove most of the nests from the first day. Mm-hmm. Because anyway, they are going to be dig out by the next turtles.
Mm-hmm. All right. More questions?
Do we have? Yeah. We have another one.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you very much for your presentation. I just would like to ask you, because it was just yesterday that I read about a message from Zanzibar that 7 people died from eating poisonous sea turtle meat. And so it's coming to my mind whether you have come across such a case in Costa Rica or in other places regarding the sea turtles and their conservation.
Well, yes, I mean, usually, well, it's not that common. These things happen. Usually, probably the turtle they ate is a hawksbill turtle that could be venomous, but it's not always venomous. So that's the problem. The people get used to eat it, but sometimes, depending on what the hawksbill has been eating, is venomous. So it's quite dangerous. I haven't seen that in Costa Rica, but I have seen that in Nicaragua. In the Atlantic side of Nicaragua, there are this Blue Lagoon and Blue Fields area is an amazing area for hawksbill and green turtle, and they hunt a lot for turtle meat. And I know there have been problems with poison.
No, because I'm just asking because this could be the way how people would decrease their demands, maybe for eggs or even sea turtle meat, because they would know that eating eggs or sea turtle meat is not healthy at all, and it can cause problems or even deaths.
Well, the eggs are never poison; they are never dangerous. So, and it's a good source of protein, and the meat usually is not dangerous neither. Usually, so what happens in some areas where the hawksbills they eat a lot of corals, they could become poison, but it's not common. So that's why in all the world around they are very used to eat the meat and the eggs, because usually it's not common. I mean, it's not poison, and obviously it's a cheap source of protein, and a very good protein, in fact.
Okay. Any other question? Okay.
Thank you for a nice presentation. I would like to ask, that you mentioned the ecotourism, but I have the feeling that it was mostly in a negative way, that this tourism started to build it up the hotels and it started to be even worse. So, but I was thinking that it can be good income for the local communities because of tourism. Tourism begin in that area, it can bring more money and these things. So do you have some like better example of ecotourism which brings good things to conservation in that area?
Yeah, I'm sorry, but there have been some cuttings and I haven't understand completely your question. I don't know if Fernando or can you repeat it?
I'm sorry, I'm gonna ask you to repeat again because
I had the feeling that the ecotourism in the area you mentioned was mostly the negative. It was like that started building up the hotels and these things. So I had the feeling that it was negative to the population of turtles and those. So I was like to ask if he has some like good examples of the tourism, because in some areas it brings some income for the local.
Okay. Yeah, okay, I got it. So you're asking if I have some example of a tourist base in wildlife that is good. Yeah. Well, yeah. There is one very, very famous one that is very good. And in fact, it saved one of the most iconic species in the world, the mountain gorilla. So the mountain gorillas are safe because of tourists. Obviously, you can say, oh, but they are too close to the gorillas, they have an impact, whatever, but they paid $750 per 1 hour watching the gorillas, and that saved the gorillas. Okay, and that's one of the most, for me, is the example. In fact, there is a very nice book written by 2 researchers from the US that they explain the whole process that take them to get to do this gorilla tourist project. That it started in Rwanda, but then later goes as well to Uganda and Congo. And I think it's the best example. Another example is that tourists are saving natural habitats. As you can see here, where I live in Kenya, many of them is a reality as well that too much tourists is starting to have an impact, obviously. So, I mean, tourist is good, but we have to control it.
I would have one more general question. You have to travel more and see most of the pristine national parks and reserves, but definitely you have to go through the common landscape as well. Do you still hope? Do you still have the hope that we can stop the destruction of the planet completely while traveling to Africa and so on? I think there are many big conservation problems, and I am always feel quite happy when I see some national park and so on. But when I talk to guys that go to the landscape, it's not protected. Usually it's very depressing. The changes are very dramatic. So how is your feeling about this?
I don't get you very well. I mean, I get the words, but I don't get what you are asking exactly, or what do you want from me?
I can repeat it a bit. I think Vasek is asking for your personal opinion on, is there hope? We have very good examples of conservation in national park and protected areas, but then the areas that are not protected, usually we get bad news from them. And is it possible to? Is there hope in the future?
Okay, there is hope, but we need a lot of money. and Africa doesn't have it. So there is one thing I always say: we, the Western people, are the ones we want to conserve. If you go to Africa and you ask people, they don't care about elephants or lions. In fact, they would like them to be killed because they are dangerous, because they kill their families, because they destroy their vegetable gardens. They are mean for them. So they don't care, absolutely, they don't care. So if we want the African landscape outside of the national parks to be protected, we have to pay it. In some ways, we have already done this because through the NGOs and Europe funds and US funds, we put a lot of money for preserving conservation areas where even they are not national parks or natural reserves. But we have to do two things. First, we need to learn how to share the land. Is very important because people is living in everywhere and they need to live in there. And as well, they want to eat every day. That's a thing. So we need to share. We need to learn how to share the land, and we need a lot of money. But I mean, I think there is hope, because there are good examples here in Kenya and in other countries in Africa. I think there is hope, but we have to invest money and resources, human resources.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome. I'm sorry, Fernando, but I have to go.
Okay.
I have family responsibilities. I hope.
Okay, so thank you for your lecture and your time, Iñaki.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
It was great. It's great to see you, and I hope you and your family are doing great there in Kenya.
Yeah, very well.
And let's hope that we meet soon, any place. I hope
Perfect.
one day there.
Yes, please.
Okay, maybe Christmas we can see each other in Spain or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, will be wonderful. We'll keep in touch. Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay,
Bye
so
bye.
thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Ciao, Iñaki.